Hello, this presentation to the Lakewood Planning Commission is about proposed updates to the Lakewood zoning ordinance. The last major update of the Lakewood zoning ordinance was done in 2012 in coordination with a similarly timed comprehensive plan update. Generally, zoning ordinances are updated at the same time as a comprehensive plan because comprehensive plans represent the vision for the community but don't contain enforceable regulations. The zoning regulations are the enforceable regulations that help us achieve the vision in the comprehensive plan. Staff has been working on updating Lakewood's comprehensive plan for approximately 2 years with dozens of public meetings and open houses and hundreds, if not thousands, of interactions and input from the public. These current proposed zoning changes have been adopted in coordination with that comprehensive planning process. There are a number of inputs into the proposals in the zoning ordinance update. Primary input, of course, is the comprehensive plan process. Staff has been working with the public for a couple of years on updating the comprehensive plan, and a large number of the concepts in that comprehensive plan have made it into this zoning ordinance update. There are also some new state laws. Colorado has passed some laws that impact local zoning. The two primary ones that you'll hear about later in this presentation include HB 241007 and HB 241324. There are other minor ones that have affected this zoning ordinance as well. Both the City Council and Planning Commission have given guidance into this process, both before it started and at study sessions leading up to the draft release. And of course, there are a number of technical updates and updates for clarity that have been identified by staff over the past 13 years of using the existing zoning ordinance. I will now discuss some of the major changes in this zoning code proposal. The first is additional opportunities for neighborhood input on site plans. Site plans are an objective review of a development proposal's compliance with the zoning code. So there aren't many opportunities for public review or a discretionary process for site plan review. However, over the past year, both City Council and Planning Commission have expressed a need for some additional opportunities for public input or public education on projects that are upcoming. The current draft contains two new changes in site plan review. First, for those projects next to large parks, there is now a requirement for a neighborhood meeting prior to the submission of a formal site plan. And secondly, in conjunction with updates to the enhanced development menu, which will be discussed later in the presentation, there are now points available for a voluntary neighborhood meeting on the behalf of a developer. In terms of properties adjacent to parks, the proposed requirement is for those adjacent to parks of 10 acres or greater. There are a large number of parks that meet this standard in Lakewood. The standard is not intended to apply to small urban parks and neighborhood parks like the one shown on the screen. This is Belmar Square. You'll see that it's surrounded on 3 sides by 5-story buildings and was designed to be an urban scale park. So there are larger parks that have more potential impact from development and smaller parks that are designed to be part of the surrounding community. Another major change in this zoning draft is significant changes to the residential districts. One of the new Colorado state laws is House Bill 241007. This bill now prohibits local municipalities from limiting the number of people that live in a single-family dwelling through the zoning code. Building code limitations still apply, but those really are not a very strict limit on the number of people that can live in a building. So the city's current limitation of 5 people in a household goes away. In fact, limitations by definition of household are no longer really viable under this new state law. Any number of people are allowed to live within a single family dwelling provided they don't go past building code occupancy limits. This generally also then means that the limitation on the number of units is no longer viable. If I have a 6-bedroom home and can rent out each bedroom to 2 or 3 people for 16 or 18 people in a single family home, there's really no difference between that and allowing 2 or 3 single family units in that home. The impacts of the state law on our current code are significant. Our existing single-family residential zones limit building size only by a height of 35 feet, which allows 3 to 3.5 stories, side setbacks of 5 feet, and then front and rear setbacks. Within that building envelope, there's no limit to the size of the building. Therefore, as lots get larger, buildings can get larger too. The average residential lot size in Lakewood is over 9,000 square feet. On these lots, buildings could be up to 16 to 18,000 square feet in size. Traditionally, this hasn't occurred because single families don't need that kind of size, but under the new state law allowing many more people to live within these buildings, it is highly possible that we could see applications for these size of buildings that allow a great number of people in these neighborhoods. With this problem in mind, staff asked our zoning consultant to look at the existing housing stock in Lakewood, the existing zoning, the existing lot sizes, the existing building sizes. One thing that they found is a distinction between the northern and eastern portions of the city and having an urban context, and the southern and western portions of the city having a suburban context. The urban context areas tend to be grid pattern streets. They tend to be narrower and deeper lots, while the suburban areas have more curvilinear streets, more cul-de-sacs, and wider and less deep lots. Since the zoning code can no longer limit the number of people in a unit, and limiting the number of units no longer controls the number of people in a building, staff used the information collected by the consultant to design new zoning districts that limit the size of the building. We're proposing a rural, suburban, and urban district within our residential areas based on the existing context of the lots as rural, suburban, or urban, and each one of those would limit the size of new buildings in them to either 2,500, 3,000, or 3,250 square feet, about the size of a large single-family home. Within these homes, there would be no limitations on the number of people, obviously, or the number of units based on the new state law. But the effective limit would be the size of the building and how many people could live in that building under the building code limitations. As part of this change, we're proposing lowering the permissible height in the districts from 35 feet to 25 feet, so maxing out at 2 to 2.5 stories for new single-family homes. The other piece of advice that we heard from both the Planning Commission and the City Council was to allow a small bump up in building size for those buildings that contain 3 or more units. So the proposed code does have a small increase in units in building size for those types of structures. A third change in the draft zoning ordinance is the removal of the mixed-use employment district. In 2012, the city created 5 mixed-use districts. All of these districts allowed residential as a standalone use and commercial and office in various use permissions. In 2019, City Council decided to stop allowing residential as a standalone use in the mixed-use employment district and instead require 50% residential and 50% commercial or office in those developments. Vertical mixed use as a concept is a fairly rare thing. Retail can happen on the ground floor, but non-retail uses above the ground floor in a residential building are very rare and hardly done. So the idea of a 50% residential and 50% commercial building isn't really viable in the market. For this reason, the mixed-use employment district has become largely undevelopable over the past 5 years, and there have been applications for rezonings out of the mixed-use employment district and other projects just put on hold or waiting to apply for rezoning. For this reason, staff is recommending removing this district and rezoning those properties with mixed-use employment to other zone districts. This presentation will end with zoning map changes that will include this change. Another district proposed to be removed is the LIRD, or Light Industrial Research and Development Zone. This zone was created in 2012 by splitting the old light industrial district between light industrial and light industrial research development. The idea of the research development district was more of an office park feel, and it limited the types of light industrial uses that were allowed. Office parks are not really a function of the market anymore or created new anymore. So the result has been just a less useful light industrial district that doesn't allow many of the uses or site layouts that are necessary in light industrial zones. Staff is proposing removing the light industrial research and development district and remapping those properties to straight light industrial. Lakewood has an increasing number of large buildings that are empty or underutilized. The draft code has a new provision that would allow an old building built prior to the adoption of this ordinance to be converted to residential. This could take place regardless of use or size limitations within any individual zone. This would allow the adaptive reuse of these old buildings and promote affordable housing. Lakewood Code currently has 9 residential use types listed, including things like single family and duplex and attached and multifamily. With the changes to the residential zones, now limiting buildings by size rather than unit count, there's a need to change the list of uses, and it can greatly simplify. The proposed draft has 3 residential uses, including residential, which would encompass everything from single family to multifamily, and again be limited in zone by the size of building. Second use is accessory dwelling. The state laws on accessory dwelling unit require cities to allow these, and so on any lot, a side building could be built with an accessory dwelling. The third use would be temporary dwelling, and this would be defined as buildings lacking a foundation that are movable, including things like mobile homes and pallet structures. Staff is proposing adding a use to the use table called Community Resource Facility. This would fill a missing gap in the use table for the provision of human services by government and nonprofit agencies. Things like food pantries and clothing distribution, job training, low-income support and services would be allowed under the Community Resource Facility use, and this is being proposed as a permitted use in all zones. The Lakewood Code currently has use permissions and standards for fueling stations, assuming that fueling stations are traditional petroleum-based fuel. With the advent of new charging stations and other fueling types, the proposal is to create a new type of fueling station. And the current standards for fueling stations would be kept under petroleum-based fueling stations, and new standards would be created for non-petroleum fueling stations. One suggested change heard at multiple points during the comprehensive planning process was the ability to have very limited neighborhood retail uses in residential zones. This would be your corner store or your little bodega that could take place in a garage or in a single-family home. The draft code contains the ability to do this in any residential zone with some strict limits on the business and its size, including 750 square foot maximum, operating hours of 8 to 8, no parking in front of the use, and limited signage. Staff is also open to adding additional restrictions on these uses based on Planning Commission and City Council feedback. Similarly to the need to create regulations around large charging stations uses, there are individual charging stations being added as accessory to uses across the city. The draft code will contain new standards for these charging stations, including limitations on height, their location on the lot, and any screening required. The existing Lakewood zoning ordinance has a bulk plane limit where mixed-use districts abut residential districts. The buildings in the mixed-use district must extend no higher than a 45-degree plane from the boundary of the residential district. The draft here contains a new provision that would apply this bulk plane standard to public parks greater than 10 acres. So mixed-use buildings would not be able to extend above a 45-degree plane from the boundary of one of these parks. Another new Colorado state law discussed at the beginning of this presentation is House Bill 24-1304. This bill prohibits local communities from requiring minimum parking within a quarter mile of a bus line or a transit station. This map is the Department of Local Government Affairs map of where that law applies. The new zoning ordinance has a provision that exempts residential properties from minimum parking requirements in the areas shown on this map. It should be noted that parking can and likely will still be provided. It's not a prohibition on parking, but a prohibition on requirements. So there could be less parking. There generally will not be developments with no parking whatsoever. Lakewood's Enhanced Development Menu was first adopted in 2019 and later updated in 2022. The Enhanced Development Menu is a list of community amenities that can be optionally provided on any new development project. None of them are required, but each project must meet a point total based on the size of the project, and each amenity is awarded a certain number of points. Many of the amenities on the list are sustainability related, but there are also site design and other community serving amenities on the list. The current draft contains updates to the Enhanced Development Menu, including taking some of the most commonly chosen items off the menu and making them general requirements on every project. These include things like energy efficient lighting, water efficiency, and recycling enclosures. And adding some new point options to the list, things like building battery storage, community gardens, and the neighborhood meeting that was talked about in one of the early slides. There are a number of other provisions that are changing in this code that are shown on this screen and discussed in some detail in the memo attached on Lakewood Speaks. In addition to the 26 that have been shown in this presentation, there are dozens of clarifying and technical edits that don't represent major policy shifts, but correct errors or clarify provisions in the code. A few of the recommendations in the above presentation necessitate changes to the zoning map. These maps aren't meant to be legible on this slide, but can be viewed on Lakewood Speaks or Lakewood Together /zoning update. They fall into two categories. On the left are properties that are difficult or impossible to use because of their existing zoning. This includes the mixed-use employment properties, which are being rezoned to other mixed-use districts. The LIRD properties, which are being rezoned to light industrial, as well as 10 other properties of different zonings across the city that have proved over the past 20 years to be undevelopable under their current zoning. The second category, of course, is the residential districts, and based on the proposals above, these include eliminating the existing R1, 6, 12, and so on, and replacing with the low-form residential rural, low-form residential suburban, urban, mobile home, and then the mid-form residential districts. Full versions of the draft code, both a clean version and a redline version, as well as this presentation of supporting documents and all the maps associated with this code change are all available on www.lakewoodtogether.org/zoning updates. Thank you.